All right. Welcome to Worcester Public Library's virtual cooking class, Wholesome Hearty Fall Cooking with Chef Kim. In today's class, Chef Kim will demonstrate how to make some great fall meals that taste great, but don't pack on a lot of extra calories or work. Chef Stetter is a graduate of the former Girls Trade in Worcester and the Culinary Institute of America. She began teaching in 2005 and in 2010 joined Worcester Technical High School as a culinary instructor and has taught cooking classes at WPL since 2017. This project has been funded in whole or in part with federal funds from the National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health, with the University of Massachusetts Worcester. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, and thank you for having me again. Wow, I can't believe it's been since 2017. That's crazy.
Yeah, welcome. We like it.
Yeah, I do too. It's good to be here. So as noted, today's recipes are going to be kind of, when you think of fall, I don't know about anybody else, but I really start thinking about comfort food, things that are just really satisfying to me, for my family, fill me up. But nobody has time to stand over a stove for hours on end making stews and all these crazy things that are going to take time. So what I really tried to focus on was finding meals that were a little healthier, definitely hearty and comforting, and things that I know I would eat and my family would eat. And I think a lot of people would say, oh, I'd never really thought of that, but yeah, that's really good. So that's what we're doing today. And welcome again. Thank you everybody for joining me on a Saturday. It's a gloomy Saturday in October, so this is a perfect day for maybe not temperature wise, but weather wise for some fall cooking. The first thing that we're going to start with is a spaghetti squash, spinach, and ricotta bake. I don't know how many people have worked with spaghetti squash before, but this is like one of my favorite things to work with. I love spaghetti squash. I love the flavor. I love the simplicity of it. And I love the fact that you can do so many things with it. Just a quick side note. So I teach at Worcester Technical High School, as noted, and we're doing 100% remote teaching right now. So we're teaching our students just like this. We do virtual cooking lessons on a daily basis. And about 2 weeks ago, I teach with 4 other chefs. And 2 weeks ago, we had a virtual cook-off. And our students got to watch and root us on as we were divided in teams of 2, given a mystery basket, and we had to pull together a meal. And one of our main ingredients was spaghetti squash. And I just have to say, it was so much fun. It was spaghetti squash. We had shrimp, tomatoes, I'm trying to think, edamame and ramen noodles. And so I made a coconut, shrimp, and spaghetti squash noodle bowl. So just an idea of just all the different things that you can do with spaghetti squash. And I have to say the cooking challenge pushed me a little bit out of my comfort zone. I wasn't 100% sure how it was going to end up making this essentially a noodle bowl with spaghetti squash, but it came out great. So I guess that's what I want you to take away from it, is that don't be afraid to do a lot of different things with your spaghetti squash, because it's just like a noodle and you can replace it in numerous ways. The other recipe, if I hadn't done the noodle bowl, was going to be a carbonara. So if you think about that, spaghetti squash would make an awesome carbonara with just some tomatoes, some basil, some bacon in there, a little bit of a heavy cream Alfredo. Boom, done. I know I make that sound really easy. I my husband always says that to me. Don't say that. It might be easy for you, but it's not as easy for anyone else. So I think everyone should have a copy of the recipes. So we're going to start with this and my spaghetti squash. You don't have to look for anything special when you're buying it. Just pick one that looks like a good size for you, because there really is a lot of meat in the spaghetti squash. This will easily make a casserole for 3 to 4 people by the time we add everything else in. If I was making a little bit something for 6 to 8, I would certainly get a larger spaghetti squash. 2 ways you can cook this. My favorite way is to cut it in half and do it in an oven to roast it. It takes a little bit longer though. So I'm actually going to start by laying it down, and I'm just going to kind of pierce it right in the middle. Depending on how sharp your knife is and how well the spaghetti squash works with you, you may be able to get it cut in half nicely. Sometimes it starts to break and it breaks up. Now, some people will tell you to scoop the seeds out now. I leave them in. I don't think it makes any bit of difference when you're roasting it. It's just as easy. If you want, brush it with a little olive oil. I usually don't. I want a very neutral flavor when I roast this. So I'm going to take this, put it on my sheet pan. Ease of cleanup. I always line my sheet pan with either foil or parchment paper because I don't want to scrub my pan when I'm done. So I'm going to lay this down, cut side down, and I'm going to stab it a few times. I could use a fork. I just use a knife 4 or 5 times in each half. Whoop. That's just going to release a little bit of the extra steam, and it's just going to help it so that it roasts. And we're going to pop that right in the oven. That's probably going to take a half hour to 45 minutes, depending on the size of the squash. The other way that you can do it, cut it in half just like I did, put it on a microwave safe plate. I like to put a little water in the bottom to add a little bit of steam. Put it in your microwave, and you can microwave it 10 to 12 minutes based on the size. I always stop my cooking halfway through, take it out, turn it around, make sure that it's cooking evenly, and put it back in. A lot quicker in the microwave. I just prefer doing it in the oven. I like the smell of it. I like the flavor of it. That's just me, personal preference. We're going to skip a little bit ahead in my recipe because it talks about tomatoes, and we're using plum tomatoes. So I found these beautiful. These are nice and soft. They're gorgeous. That is my preference. The recipe also says that you can use cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes. I don't like when I put a casserole in the oven, I don't like the tomato skins when I'm eating something like that. It's a texture thing for me. So that's why I use plum tomatoes. And I'm going to show you my little secret with them so that you don't have any skin and you don't have any seeds. This is a fancy cooking term. So when you're done, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. It's called concasse, and that's CONCASSE. And you can sound really fancy now when you tell your friends, well, you just do a tomato concasse. It's really simple. And what you do is you take your tomato. I've got a little, we call it a tomato shark. It's just a little gadget with teeth on the top of it. You can use a knife, but we're going to take the top core out so that the core is missing on each one. And we're going to make a little X on the butt. So I've just got a sharp knife, and I think you can see that. I just made a little X right on the butt. What that's going to do is it's going to help to peel the tomato when we're done. Oh, thank you for typing that in the chat. Like I said, you can sound fancy to all your friends when you say, oh, I learned how to do this the other day. It's fabulous. Drop these in boiling water. And you want to have just enough so that it covers the top of the tomatoes. What are you waiting for? Well, what you're waiting for is the skin to blister. Just like if you were to put boiling water on your skin, if you were to drop some, your skin would blister. The tomato does the same thing. You should take anywhere between 10 seconds to a minute. And I give that big of a range because if your tomato is really firm, it's going to take a lot longer. If it's already super ripe and soft, it's going to take a lot less time. So I'm just going to take a look at, oh yeah, some of these are just about ready. And I'm going to show you as soon as they are. So the skin is going to blister. And I think you might be able to see, it's just starting to, I can't get the right angle in. See, it's just starting to split right here in the front. We're going to give it a couple more seconds and that's going to be perfect. I have a bowl of ice water here, just ice cubes and water. And as soon as these are done, I'm going to plunge them right into the ice water. And that's going to keep my tomato from cooking and becoming mush. You want to be able to take the skin off, but you don't want to cook the tomato so that it's mushy. I'm going to move this out of the way. There, now we can see even better. We'll give those a couple seconds just to sit. They're pretty cool. And so this one is really, you can really see, let me see if I got that there. You can really see that the skin is even almost falling off as we speak. And the skin just peels right off. And sometimes you get a spot where it's stuck a little bit, but don't worry about it. So it's peels now. I'm going to put it back in the water. And that's just, sometimes they're gritty. It's just to rinse the grittiness off. Let's say that you left it in there too long and your skin is really falling off when you take it out. Don't worry about it. It's the only, as I say, the only difference it's going to make is your tomato might be a little softer than you would like. I'd peel it with a knife, but you don't have to. While we're on the subject, this is a great trick to do with your summer tomatoes. If you have a huge bumper crop and you don't know what to do with them because you've made as much salsa as you can eat, or you've done as much as you can with them. If you peel them like this and you cut them in half, as long as you seal them in something airtight and they're nice and cold, put them right in your freezer like this. And then anytime you need tomatoes in a recipe, you can pop them out and use them. And that's what I do.
We do have a question. Would this work with bell pepper skins?
It doesn't work as well. Yes, somewhat, but my preferred method for that would be in the oven, to spray it with a little olive oil and pop it in the oven, and that will blister easier there. I hope that helps. So now that we have them, they're peeled. I'm going to cut them in half. Slipper little things. And I use a plum tomato because they have less seeds. And I'm kind of going to get my fingers in there and just scoop out the seeds. So let me show you that. So I just pulled the seeds out of there and rinsed it. And I have just the shell of the tomato. I like it better. I think there's less. I'm just not a seed person to have in my casseroles. It's not something, it's not a texture I like. My husband wouldn't have a problem with it, but since I'm cooking, we get to do it my way. I like a plum tomato anyways, because I think they have better flavor for cooking. You know, you never know what you're going to get with a cherry tomato. Sometimes they're really great, but in the winter, they're not going to be as great. So you could you use a canned tomato? Absolutely, you could. That's certainly something you could do. So
we have another question. Should you remove the seeds before freezing?
You don't have to, but yes, it would be easier. If you don't want to use the seeds, yes, that would certainly be easier. And I like to lay them flat in a Ziploc bag. That way you can stack them. Excuse me, you can stack them easier. So therefore it would be better if you take the seeds out, because then I can just stack them one on top of each other.
Thank you.
So that's done. The next step is going to be to chop these. And I hope everybody, yeah, you can see my cutting board enough. And I'm just going to lay them flat. You can even squish them with your hand. They're pretty sturdy right now. And I'm going to cut these into strips and I'm going to dice them. And that will be added to my squash when we get a little bit further along in the recipe. So, oh, and there is it's kind of a typo in the recipe. if you're reading it, it says, it looks like it calls for a 15-ounce bag of spinach. It is not a 15-ounce bag. It should be 1 5-ounce bag. So there's not a space in there. So I did want to make note of that.
We have another question. What type of knife are you using? And what do you recommend for most cooking prep?
Whoops, flinging tomatoes here. I particularly like this. This is a what they call a Santuco blade. So it's flat, but it has these little ridges on the side. And that helps your food. It creates an air pocket when you're chopping. And it kind of helps your food slide off a little bit easier. Honestly, and people will laugh when they hear this. This is a knife from Calphalon. My husband and I used to go to the Calphalon outlet in Kittery, which is no longer there. And this has become one of my favorite knives. What I would say is get something that suits your hand. It feels good in your hand. It has a good weight. So it's not too heavy for you. I like a shorter knife, something that feels good in terms of size. Sharp. I wouldn't say go out and spend $120 on a knife, but certainly you want to spend $40 or $50 on a good knife to get something that is going to be good, that you can keep sharp. That's my personal opinion. And I like a knife that's what's called forged. So my blade goes all the way through here, meaning that I'm going to show you another one. Once I find it. Well, this is not a great example, but if you can see here, so the knife here, there's a blade that runs through here, but your handle is riveted on. So what that means is that your blade is here and it's just a little piece of metal going through here. Your handle is very light. That's what they call it's not a forged knife. So it is one piece, but it's lighter. And there's nothing wrong with that. It depends on what weight that you like. Just sometimes you want to make sure that the rivets aren't something that's going to irritate your hand. So as I say, this one you can tell is just one full design, one whole piece. Again, anything that you feel, Hinkle makes a great knife. They also make a great everyday use knife, so they're not super expensive. Dexter, you know what? Dexter makes good knives. They're utility knives. They're located in Mass. I don't know if they have them in most retail stores, but you could go to a kitchen store and find a Dexter and it'll be a decent knife and you're not going to spend probably more than $40 or $50 on it. And that's going to be an okay knife. One that will sharpen, and that's what you want. Then one that'll sharpen and keep a nice edge. Sharpening is a whole nother thing because without, you can use your steel, which comes with most of your knife kits. And this will actually help to put an edge back on your blade. But once you get your knife so dull that it won't cut, you need to find someone who can do some knife sharpening for you or find a knife stone. Because if your knife is so dull, this is never going to fix it to the point where you've got a knife sharp again. Nice knife. Ugh, I can't speak. Nice, sharp knife. So that's, I hope that helps. I hope that's a nice recommendation for you.
Yes, thank you, Kim.
I love it. Okay, so we have our tomatoes chopped. Move those out of the way. Through the magic of TV, our squash is done. So this is what your squash is going to look like when it's done. It's really soft on the top. So if you open up your oven, it's going to get brown on top. You're going to smell a lot of good roasting flavors, and it should be pretty squishy when you pull it out of the oven. And I usually wait a good 5-10 minutes after it comes out of the oven because it's too hot to hold. And I'm just going to take a kitchen spoon and very carefully, I'm just going to scrape to get my seeds out, and I'm going to lift them out. It's almost like scooping out a pumpkin. once all my seeds are out, sometimes I miss a few and I have to go back and get them again. So once I've gotten my seeds out, I'm going to put this right in the bowl that we're going to use in. You can use a fork or you can use that same spoon. And I'm just going to come right up to the edge and I'm going to scrape. And these are going to come out like nice long strands. I don't know why I'm using a fork. I always use a spoon. I find it much easier. At the very top where your core comes in, you're going to have a little area where you won't be able to scoop just because the neck of the squash is there. But keep scraping. Again, this is much easier to do after it's cooled. If you think about it, you could probably roast this, you know, the night before you want to use it and scoop it and stick it in your fridge and then make your dish, you know, the next day. And that there's nothing going to be wrong with that. So I've literally scooped pretty much everything out of there. There is not much left. Another this makes a great side dish. My dad loves this when I make this for him. I just take my spaghetti squash and then I saute this and I serve this just as a little side dish at dinner. So with a little bit of, everything is better with garlic and olive oil. So that's how I cook it. And it makes a great side dish, like a little pasta to serve with a chicken parm. And it's a nice change from pasta if you don't want to have pasta all the time. All right, so that's in there. All right, I have a little spot here. I wish my light would, that's a little bit dark. Don't worry about that. It got a little overcooked, but your squash itself is just beautiful, beautiful, nice long strands. Okay. So we have that. And what we're going to do, we have our tomatoes are already done. We're going to chop up a little bit of garlic. And then we're going to saute our garlic in olive oil along with our spinach. We're going to add some salt and pepper. And we're going to get that all ready to go. Mix that with some ricotta cheese. While we're on the subject, so this is a spinach and ricotta bake. I also do a spaghetti squash lasagna, which is phenomenal. Start with the same process. You can take the squash as it is right now. I would put a pair of gloves on. You can do it with your bare hands. I just happen to wear gloves when I do it. And take it and squeeze it really, really hard. You're going to squeeze a lot of moisture out of there. And that makes it nice and dry. And you can layer it into your casserole dish just like you would a lasagna. So I would put a little layer of sauce down. I would put a layer of spaghetti squash. My toppings, I would use maybe some ricotta, I've done it with ground chicken. I've done it with ground beef, a little more sauce, excuse me, cheese, another layer of spaghetti squash. Build it just the way you would a lasagna. Cook it just the way you would a lasagna. And the flavor is phenomenal. And it's just a nice treat. And you don't feel quite so guilty because you're getting a double dose of vegetables. All right, we got a couple cloves of garlic here. I think it's going to be good. I'm sure I've shown everybody before my favorite way of smashing garlic. I show this to the kids at the school, and this is their favorite trick in the whole world. Oh, I'm going to move back or close. I'm trying to figure out where I can get the best angle here. There we go. Put the rounded portion away from you with your knife at the edge of your cutting board and just whack it. And it smashes it right away. The kids love to do this. They think this is the best thing ever. sometimes you send a little garlic flying, but it's really good if you've been having a tough day or it's the middle of the fall and you're tired of being stuck in your house, and just adds a little something to the cooking. I'm gonna chop this up nice and small. You could also be less aggressive about it and just use the top of your hands to smash it. So that's the less aggressive way of doing it, especially because now my husband's going to ask me why there's garlic on the floor a little bit later. I always use olive oil when I'm working with the spaghetti squash. It adds better flavor, and it just blends really well with it, especially where we're trying to have less calories. I wouldn't use the butter as much as I love butter. All right, we got that pretty well chopped up. All right. I get my 1 hunk of garlic. We'll get this ready to go here. A little olive oil. Olive oil, garlic's gonna go in there. Our tomatoes are gonna go in there. Then our spinach is gonna go in there. All of this is going to end up in our bowl of spaghetti squash with our 15-ounce tub of ricotta cheese. I like to use a part skim. If you want to use where you're substituting spaghetti squash for the pasta, you could use a heavier fat, a full fat ricotta, because you've cut a lot of calories taking that pasta out. Anybody who has been to one of my classes knows that one of my favorite things to do in the kitchen is I keep a mix of salt and pepper in a little tub. I do about 2/3 salt, about 1/3 black pepper, and I keep this on hand at all times. When I go to season, I have my salt and pepper all in one place, and it makes it a lot easier to work with. So I'm just going to sprinkle some salt and pepper on there. My pan is almost hot enough. Gotta look at what time it is. I might just speed myself up here. I always seem to talk too long and then this runs late, or I have to rush my last recipe because I like to talk too much.
Well,
go ahead.
We've got a little bit of wiggle room, but we do
Okay.
have another program at 4. But we got a little bit of time if we run over 3:30 a little bit.
Okay. That's one thing I've learned doing these at school and whatnot is an hour goes a lot quicker than you think it does. Most days. Some days, not so much. All right, so I've mixed my ricotta cheese. I wish there wasn't such a glare. I mixed my ricotta cheese into my spaghetti squash, and that's ready. That's all set. One thing you definitely don't want to do is get your pan too hot, because if you burn your garlic at this stage, this is not going to taste very good. So I got my garlic in there. We're just going to let it go for a couple of minutes. I prefer baby spinach because most of the stems, and I say most, it's definitely not all, but most of the stems are gone or shorter. I always kind of go through and pick out the really big stems. And again, that's just a personal preference. You do not have to. I said a tablespoon of olive oil for this recipe. I may want to add another tablespoon after my garlic has been sauteed, because the spinach is going to soak up a lot of that olive oil and it's going to be very dry. Obviously, you don't want to make your dish too wet, but I certainly don't want to have it to the point where there's nothing to cook my spinach with. Okay, my garlic is beautiful. My tomatoes are going to go in. I think you can hear that sizzle a little bit. Let me give that a couple seconds. Let me move that so we can make sure it's in. Smells great. Give it a couple seconds. We're just going to get this spinach in here and start stirring it. You really don't need to give it much time. You want to wilt it, but you don't want to make it so that it's mushy, mushy, mushy. So we're just going to keep stirring. I might even do this step before my squash is done and then cool it slightly. That way you're not mixing a hot spinach with the cold ricotta and the squash. If I was going to do that, I would cook this right away. I would not put it in the refrigerator and wait until later. You just always want to be cautious about making sure you're at the right temperature for everything that you're doing. So that whole bag of spinach really cooks down. And that's what I have. So it looked like an enormous amount in there, but there's really not very much left. And there's a little bit of moisture in the bottom. Great. It smells phenomenal. I can smell garlic. I smell tomatoes. We're going to put that right in with our squash. Okay. And we're going to fold this all together. It smells really good. You could chop your spinach ahead of time if you wanted to, so that you don't get big chunks of spinach. Again, for some people that can be very difficult to swallow, or just a real turnoff, and that they don't necessarily get a small bite of it. So we have that nice and mixed. Okay. Gonna go right into our casserole dish, which I forgot to take out. And we're gonna spray that with a little bit of olive oil. No other reason than it makes the pan easier to clean, makes it a little bit easier to come out of the pan. I have an 8 or a 9x9 baking dish here. Now the recipe, I believe, says to fold in your mozzarella at this time. There's a 1/2 cup it calls for. We're going to add a little bit, and we're going to save a little bit for the top. I really like a nice cheesy top when we do anything like this. So I got my mozzarella. Okay, that was a generous 1/2 cup, maybe a little bit more. Now, some people would ask, why aren't you adding an egg? Like when you mix ricotta, usually for lasagna, you always add an egg in there to help bind it. You could, and it's not going to change anything. You know, you've got a lot of the moisture out of it by cooking the spinach. The tomatoes aren't super moist. The spaghetti squash isn't super moist. So, you know, this is going to be not as solid as a lasagna. This is going to have a little bit more flow to it, more like a baked ziti, I guess, so that it's creamier. So you don't necessarily need to add the yolk. I have a grater for some fresh Parmesan cheese. Get a little bit of that in there. My family doesn't know what's for dinner, but I do. Whoop. Okay. We're going to layer that right in here. And I'm going to mix it around a little bit just so I can make sure my squash is evened out nicely. Oh, that looks great. Got some spinach on my stove. There's the finished casserole. I'm going to put a little bit more cheese on the top. And that would go right into the oven. Now, since it's already partially warmed, I wouldn't cook that. It's probably only going to take 20 minutes, 25 minutes max. You're just heating it through. Everything is cooked. The ricotta just needs to warm through. It's not that hot, even though my spaghetti squash is a little cold. My ricotta was cold. So my spinach and my tomatoes there didn't add a lot of heat to it. As long as your squash is cold, you could probably chill it at this point in time and put it away and cook it at a later date, because there's not a lot of heat in there. If your squash was hot and you mix it like this, I would certainly cook it right away, because there just tends to be an issue with bacteria if you wait too long and you let that sit. But this would be perfect to chill right now if my squash was cold. So that'll go into the oven. And I don't have a finished one to show you because that literally is the one going into the oven. So we can maybe circle back around to that after. So as I said, with the spaghetti squash, it would make a great lasagna. You could, layer that even with your spinach and your tomatoes in there. I would certainly cook my spinach ahead of time. If I was going to use that in there, you could do, your ground meat. I've done chicken sausage before. It's a great, great, great way to have a nice casserole. The other thing is if you get a big enough spaghetti squash, you can build this and freeze this. This freezes wonderfully. So you can keep it in your freezer 2 months, 3 months, take it out just like you would if you had a frozen lasagna or whatnot. I would probably try and give it a half hour, 45 minutes on your counter, pop it right in your oven, 350 degrees. I would say 45 minutes, uncover it, maybe another 20 minutes, half an hour, uncovered to let the top get nice and bubbly. And then you're going to let it sit for a little bit. This doesn't get as wet as a normal lasagna would, so that you really have to let it sit before you cut it. This, not so much. Again, fantastic. One of my most requested when I cook casseroles or things for friends. This is it. This is one of the most requested ones. Let's see. So I figured the stuffed acorn squash is pretty self-explanatory in that you're working with an acorn squash, but you're cutting it in half, top to bottom, so that you get 2 halves. And then the onion, sausage, apple, and spinach mixture, very, very, very flavorful. The apples just add a lot of extra flavor to that. Spinach is just so you can sneak some green in there and make it a little bit healthier, get some good stuff in there to feel a little bit better about the sausage in there. You can use chicken sausage. You can use turkey sausage. Pork sausage is fine too, with sweet Italian sausage. Just those flavors are fantastic. So you would cook your whole thing on the side. You're going to par cook your squash as well, stuff everything in there, and then put it back in the oven for a few minutes. You could do a Mediterranean take on it. You could add feta cheese to that if you wanted to, with some feta and some spinach and ground chicken stuffed into this. Oh, I'm making myself hungry. So there's just the possibilities are endless. The squash is just going to add sweetness. It's going to be fiber, so it's going to be filling for you, and it's going to give a lot of great flavor. So it's not going to, you're not going to feel like you've eaten this big casserole, but you're going to have a satisfying meal. And that's why I like to go with things like that. I have on the recipes a harvest soup. Phenomenal, guys. Absolutely the easiest thing ever. You want to wow your friends with a really great, easy soup. And if you want to get some vegetables into your kids, this is a great way to do that because they're not going to know. You've got rutabaga in there. You've got sweet potatoes. You've got carrots. You've got apples. You've got onions. You've got, am I missing anything? Rutabaga, sweet potato, carrot, onion, apple. I think that's everything that's in there. And you just saute the onions first. I cannot stress that enough. If you do not cook the onions ahead of time, you're going to have a raw onion flavor in your whatever you're making. So always cook them first, then throw everything else in. Put your stock in. It calls for a good chicken stock. You can do a vegetable stock if you want to make this truly vegetarian, truly, it wouldn't be vegan because you're going to add cream to it, but truly vegetarian, do a vegetable stock. Cook it till it's mush, basically. Cook till all your vegetables are soft, puree it, add your heavy cream, your maple, and your maple syrup and seasonings. People love this soup. It's got a lot of nice, this with a beautiful salad on the side would be a perfect meal. I wouldn't even maybe necessarily do a salad, maybe a nice loaf of crusty bread. And that would be a phenomenal meal for for your winter time. Just something that's nice. You can do it in a crock pot as well. Just something super, super, super easy and has a lot of good flavors to it. The next one I'm going to do, and we are going to do it together, is our chicken tortilla stew. This one's a little bit more involved, and I certainly wanted to showcase this one because of the cooking of the tortillas and how we're going to use that to thicken our soup. So your corn and your corn tortillas are natural thickeners. If you've ever had, like a corn chowder, if you were to cook the corn or puree it, it really goes, it sucks up all that moisture and becomes very thick. So we're using that as the base for our chicken stew. So let me get my chicken, get my gloves. Now, the recipe that I have, or that I gave you, calls for chicken thighs. The reason I said chicken thighs, because there's more fat, so there's more flavor. Whenever there's more fat in something, it's going to remain more moist. And so if you need to cook that for a longer time, it's going to be a lot more, it's going to be a lot moister at the end. I, however, for today, I used chicken breasts. I did keep them on the bone because your bone is going to add moisture. And I did not cook my chicken all the way through, but I did poach it in my chicken stock. So the recipe that we have listed calls for taking your chicken thighs and cooking them in your chicken stock. There, it calls for 6 cups of stock. I would use at least 4 cups. You don't necessarily have to use all of it unless you need it to cover your chicken thighs or chicken breast. The reason I cook my meat in the stock is it just adds even more flavor. If you don't have stock, don't worry about it. Cook your chicken in a pot of water with some bones in there. The bones are going to add flavor. You're going to get flavor from that. Your chicken is not the dominant flavor in this soup. It's more about the corn and the tortillas and the Southwestern flavors. So don't worry if you don't have chicken stock. It's okay. And if you want to do it vegetarian, just omit the chicken and you can use a vegetable stock. And we could pick up with the second part of the second stage in the recipe where it talks about cooking your onions and all that. So I'm going to chop my chicken up a little bit here. If you could pull it into shreds, you can dice it. You can, if you want to get super simple, buy a rotisserie chicken and just pull the meat off a rotisserie chicken. Use what you want. You can, if you really wanted to, you could cook the bones and get a little bit more flavor from the bones. But again, you don't have to. In a pinch, grab a chicken, pull the meat off, and start the recipe. Anyways, either way, you're going to end up with a phenomenal product. So my chicken here is just about cut. Give it a few more seconds. Does anyone have any questions so far? I can certainly answer some questions if anybody would like. Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess I'll keep. So I've got 2 breasts here that I've cut up, which I'll show you how much. If you had a pound of chicken thighs, you do a pound or a pound and a half, just because with the bone, you tend to get a little bit less meat. But I have my chicken all nice and diced. I'll take my gloves off. I'm actually going to move this, see if we get a little bit more room. That's not going to make a difference. We're going to cook on the burner over here so we can see. I have onion already cut. Oh, I got to cut my tortilla strips. I jumped ahead of myself. Bring the cutting board back. I'm going to change it out since my chicken, Again, I never cut chicken and then something else. I always make sure I either wash my cutting board or change my cutting board altogether. So I'm going to get rid of it altogether. Gonna wash my knife as well. I think I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Don't wash your knives in the dishwasher. And it's not so much that the dishwasher is bad for them, but the force of the water tends to throw them around a little bit, or they tend to bump into something, and you might get little nicks in your blade, and you'll start to ruin your blade. If you're going to spend good money on a knife, hand wash it and put it back. That way you're just taking care of that. It's an investment, so you're taking care of your investment. Okay, new cutting board. I like white corn tortillas. You can get yellow, but corn is the key part. You want a corn tortilla. If I could figure out how to open the package, that'd be good. What's good about these is that they're very pliable, and that's going to be the best part for your recipe. So I said 6. I've got 5 here. I'm going to get 1 more. This is going to be a natural thickener. It would be like using, I don't want to say cornmeal because that would be weird to put it in but it's going to soak up all this moisture combined with my corn. And between the two of them, it's going to give us great flavor as the base of our soup. As I said, you could just take out the chicken and still do the whole thing the same way with the corn. So I'm going to cut them here. I can see a little bit better. I start by cutting them in half, and that way I can work with half at a time. It doesn't matter how you cut this. I'm just going to cut little strips. I'm going to cut it as small as I can because the smaller I cut them, the faster they'll cook. And I'm going to turn them and chop them up one more time. Alternately, I suppose you could soak them in a little bit of stock if you wanted to, but I think you get better flavor when you do it this way. So I'm going to chop them up. And the nice thing is about this too, is this becomes gluten-free because you've got a corn tortilla. So this becomes a gluten-free preparation. If anybody's worried about that, we're not going to add, normally a chowder would have like a roux or some flour in there. This has none of that. So anybody who's gluten-free can have this. So that's another nice thing. Okay, where's my pot? I got my pot. I'm going to put it on the stove, and I'm going to heat that up, and I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of butter. I love butter when I'm doing a soup or really like a stew like this. You're going to get better flavor. The other thing butter will help you do is it'll help add a little bit caramelization, a little color to anything if you want it. 2 tablespoons doesn't look like enough. I'm going to add another tablespoon. Sometimes, honestly, when I try and get these exact when I do them, but sometimes my measurements are a little bit off in a small way, not in a big way. I don't want you to think that I'm giving you recipes that are false. We're going to let that heat up, and then we're going to get our onions in there, half of our onions, all of our corn tortillas, and half of our corn. And what that's going to do is that's going to cook for a little bit. Again, we're cooking the flavor out of the onions so that they're not bitter, they're not too strong. The corn tortillas, that's going to get them moist. The butter's going to give them flavor. And what that's also going to do is it's going to allow the corn to warm up a little bit. You could use canned corn, doesn't make any difference. You could use creamed corn. That would even add another layer to it by giving it a little extra oomph. And I call this a stew or a chowder because I've given you 2 options on doing this. First option we're going to do is the stew version. I don't know that we'll be able to make the chowder, but when we get to the point where we would switch over to a chowder, we'll talk about that. And I think that's in the recipe as well. I prefer unsalted butter. I always salt things at the end. And also because when I bake, I use unsalted butter. So it's just easier for me to buy one type versus salted versus unsalted. A lot of recipes when you're cooking don't call for unsalted. Again, personal preference on my part. All right, my butter is nice and melted. The reason I'm only putting half of my onions in now is because I'm going to puree this mix after it's all cooked. And when I make a stew, I want to know I have stuff in it. And so I'm going to save my onions and my peppers and half of my corn for later so that as I'm eating it, I'm getting spoonfuls of onions and corn and everything else in there and not just chicken. All right, give that a couple of seconds. Put tortillas in there. We get half of our corn. Thereabouts. All right. It smells very good. I would have to say that's the one thing the kids hate the most about us doing these demos is, of course, we tell them all the time, oh, it smells so good. And, oh, it looks so good. And then we taste it and then they get really upset because we eat it in front of them. And that's the one thing the kids always say, that's not fair. You're eating what you made. And I said, someone has to taste it. Now, what's going to happen, and I'll show you in a second, is it's going to start to stick to the bottom of the pot and it's going to start to look really funny. And that's okay because we want the tortillas to start breaking down. We want the corn to start getting warmed up. I'm going to give it a few more seconds. And you can see how my tortillas are starting to stick to the bottom of the pan. That's okay. Gonna let them go for a few minutes longer. And I think I forgot to do this in the recipe. So I want to make sure that I include it now. Is we're gonna have to give this a little bit of liquid. Otherwise, there's no way we're gonna be able to puree this. So the recipe calls for 6 cups of chicken stock. I would take and add, a cup to a cup and a half right now, and that's gonna help keep it moist and puree it a little bit better. So we're gonna give it just a few more seconds. All right. The cup looks perfect. I'm going to show you that in just a second. So you can see it's got some liquid to it. Well, it's hard to see. Some liquid to it, but it's not super soggy. We're going to let that come to a boil. And the corn tortillas are going to act like a sponge, and they're just going to suck all that moisture up. And that's going to be perfect because then when we puree that, this is going to be super thick, and that's what we want to have. All right, we do have a little bit of time. I'm going to take the squash out of the oven that's been roasting since we started. So it's been 45 minutes, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when I take it out of the oven. So those were the squash just as they come out of the oven. I can squeeze the sides. That's hot. And squeeze the sides a little bit, and they're pretty soft, and they're a little bit browned on the top. These are perfect. That's what we're looking for. Okay. This is at a boil. I'm going to try and pull a piece out here. It's hot. My tortillas are essentially turning to mush right now. If I were to squeeze them, they're turning into a paste. That's the perfect consistency that we're looking for. So that's going to help them break down. I may mute myself in a second because I'm going to throw these into the food processor and it's going to be super loud. So I may mute myself for just a second when I throw them in the food processor. But let me get to that point. And this is nothing fancy. I have a Ninja bullet. And when you spend the money, you get the one with the blender and everything on it. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. It should be just pretty watery. And I'll have to speed up a little bit here. I know we don't have a lot more time. I'll at least get you through this phase and talk you through the next, and that way we don't take too long, go too far over. Okay, I'm going to mute you real quick, or mute myself real quick.
While she's doing that, while she's doing that, I'm posting. You can unmute yourself, Kim.
Okay, now I can. Perfect. So let me see if I can. I'll get you a bowl to put this in so that you can see. So what we have, it almost looks like, there. It almost looks like a cornbread mix. It's just this really pureed corn mixture, and that's going to be the bulk and the basis of our soup. So our stew. So from here, we would, let's see, what time do I have? I would saute the rest of my onions, my peppers in a little bit more butter. I get those so where my onions are a little cooked, my peppers are a little cooked. I would add the rest of my chicken stock. So I only added a cup when I did that. I'd add 5 more cups of chicken stock. I would add my diced tomatoes, definitely cumin and chili powder. And again, I gave you, I think it was 2 teaspoons of chili powder, 2 of cumin. Feel free to add more based on your taste level. I would add a lot more cumin. I love cumin. I would add my mixture here. So basically add everything into the pot, season it, add my cilantro, and let it simmer for about 20 minutes. And that's going to give you amazing flavor. If you got to the stage where you did your onions, your peppers, your corn, your broth, you can turn it into a chowder by not putting the tomatoes in and using instead, this is a super secret trick, evaporated milk. Your evaporated milk is going to add creaminess to it. It's going to add a lot of flavor, but it has a lot less fat than using heavy cream in there. And again, you're not, and it's just going to add some creaminess to it. And of course, the final piece being chicken. Put the chicken in there. I would still finish it with my cilantro, my cumin, my chili powder, all the same, salt and pepper. That would be the chowder. And at the end, if I wanted to, for the stew, I add black beans so that you've got another layer in it. And again, if you're not using your chicken and you add your black beans, then it becomes a complete protein because the two married together will give you all of the essential amino acids that you need so that you've got a full protein in your meal. So it's perfect for anybody who's vegan if you do it as a stew. And it's got amazing and great flavor. I'm just going to finish cooking it, but because I don't want to go too late when we're at 3:30, I'll be happy to take questions or clarify anything because I know I kind of rushed this one a little bit because I spent too long on the first one, which I usually do.
Well, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, go ahead, or you can continue to use the chat to ask questions through me. But you do have the ability to unmute yourselves now if you do have any questions for Chef Kim. If not, I have posted all of the links I mentioned at the beginning of the program into the chat again. So the top one is the link to the survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you fill it out and just let us know how we're doing. And then, of course, there's the link to the recipes right below from Chef Kim herself, our nutrition and healthy cooking blog, a link to our classes to register, our adult reading challenge, Woo Reads, if you are a reader and you want to help us out. And then at the very bottom, the Healthy Hearty Cooking Book List, which Dot put together for you folks. And books count in our reading challenge, cookbooks count, rather, in our reading challenge. So you can log those too.
I may have to join that challenge. I love it.
You can win a Kindle Paperwhite if you like. Yeah, so there is another question. How is the flavor if you don't puree and just add all the other ingredients?
I think it'd still be great. It would still, the tortillas might throw you off a little bit. So I might omit them because, well, no, because they're going to cook out. They're going to become mushy. I think they'd be fine. I really do. I just like to puree it because it makes it nice and thick, really gives it a lot of body. And that's the only reason I do it.
Great.
Yeah, so we're just going to, and I did forget to add that I also, if you wanted to, you could add diced chilies in the beginning or a jalapeno if you want to add a little zing to it, a little spice to it, and really kind of take it up a notch, which my family would love. So I would definitely put that in there. So my onions and my peppers are just about done, and I'm in just a second, I'm going to add everything. So if you're still here, I can certainly at least show you that process. And then I promise I'll stop talking.
Well, it looks like everyone's hanging in to see how it goes.
I don't blame them. I'd be bummed out if I were them going, geez, she didn't finish. I get carried away sometimes in explaining things or talking about things. And
oh, we do have a question about the acorn squash recipe.
Okay.
Can you add breadcrumbs and cheese?
Yes, and that would be phenomenal as well. I think that would, and I would go, yeah, add, oh God, provolone would be great in there. Mozzarella would be great in there. Any of those. All right, whoop. So you can see when I look, I'm trying to get less things in the way.
Are spaghetti squash available all year, or is it just in the fall?
You can usually find them year round, yes. The quality is going to be better in now because, you know, everybody's just picking them right now. So you're going to have a little bit better quality, but you can certainly find it year round, yes.
Do you ever find spaghetti squash in the frozen section?
No, I have never seen it there. I don't know that anybody has ever attempted to do that. I don't, that's a great question. All right, I forgot my corn. That's going to go in there too. I'll be able to show you this in just a second when I clean up my little mess here. My husband's going to love me. I got dishes to do. So right now, it doesn't look super, hold it back here. It doesn't look super thick. It looks kind of like a soup. It's going to kind of, I mean, it's not going to thicken up a lot, but there's a lot of body to it with the pureed corn and everything. And it looks like a very light, I guess if I had to describe it, like a very light cornmeal batter or cornbread batter. I lost my can opener. Oh, there it is. Gonna get the diced tomatoes in there, the seasonings, and the chicken, and we're just gonna let that simmer. And it's gonna have just phenomenal flavor. I like a petite diced tomato. Again, that's a personal preference because I don't want a lot of, I don't like big chunks of tomatoes in there. Get the chicken in there. So it just looks right now, I can see a lot of tomato, I can see chicken, I can see peppers. I might have used a green pepper versus a red pepper just so that it's a little bit, it's not as red, but we're gonna get our cumin and our chili powder in there. And I'm gonna tell a secret. I don't usually measure when I'm doing this on my own. So I just add some in. I'll be good though. I'll And the cilantro is going to really give it a little extra color when it's done. And this is really thick right now. It's like there's virtually no room for my spoon because I've got all kinds of, I wish I could, it's got really, really full pieces in here. And smells great. I'm going to add salt and pepper and let that simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes. I'll finish it with my beans and my cilantro. That is it. Oh, I guess I should. Definitely need salt and pepper. And I personally would give it a little bit more cumin. I love, love, love cumin. People don't like cilantro, so if you don't like cilantro, certainly omit that step. You don't need it. And you could even save this at the very end. Oh, that'd be phenomenal. Crunch when you're done. Serve it in bowls with some crunched tortilla chips on top and a little dab of sour cream. Yum.
We do have a question about what does cilantro taste like?
I think it's got a very pronounced flavor. A lot of people will tell you that they think it tastes soapy. And that's the one most common thing that people tell me why they don't like it is it's got a weird mouthfeel and a weird taste to them. I honestly think that's a personal thing. I've never tasted soap with it. So what does it taste like when you've got that really nice, fresh, beautiful salsa and you can taste the tomatoes and you've got that little extra oomph, that herb that tastes, that's the taste of cilantro. I wish I could describe it better than that.
Well, it's also in the parsley family, right? So somewhat related.
Yep. It's what they call Mexican parsley. So and actually it looks a lot like a parsley, but the reason you can tell that it's different is I don't know if I can hold this close enough. Your leaves have little, it looks a lot like a flat Italian parsley, but your leaves are a little more round, more jagged sometimes, for lack of a better word. They're not as nicely rounded as they are with parsley. And it smells really good. That's the best part. So that's going to simmer. It's going to look, what's the one thing, because we pureed the corn tortillas, it's a little bit of a chunky, so it's got some grit to it. So it's going to look as though it curdled. It did not curdle. It's just the way it looks because of the corn tortilla in there. So do not be afraid of that when you look at that, because I'm looking at it now thinking, yeah, I should mention that, but it's perfectly fine. I'm going to turn it down and let it simmer. And I will stop talking and let you go.
Well, thank you so much, Chef Kim. This was great. I have some dinner ideas now, and I hope everybody else does. And we just want to thank you all for coming to our virtual cooking class. We know it's not the same and we don't get to try the foods, but it's still a lot of fun. And we hope to see you at our next one. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.